Good afternoon. On behalf of Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to today's Cornerstone webinar. My name is Christina Carter Grant, and I serve as the Senior Program Officer for National Leadership in Education here at the Center for Community Progress. Cornerstone is our webinar series, which equips participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's Cornerstone, we are joined by Janelle O'Keefe, Austin Harrison, and Melissa Hartline. Janelle O'Keefe serves as the Senior Program Officer for Michigan Initiatives at the Center for Community Progress. At Community Progress, she supports the organization's work in Michigan and spearheads the organization's work on vacant land stewardship, which aims to inspire and foster the necessary systems-level policy changes to support long-term, large-scale reuse of vacant land that will build healthier, more resilient communities across the nation. Austin Harrison is an assistant professor of urban studies at Rhodes College. Prior to Rhodes, he has worked for almost a decade as a practitioner in the community development field in Memphis, Youngstown, and in other cities across the country. His previous work has been published in Housing Policy Debate, the Journal of Urban Affairs, and Federal Reserve Bank publications. And lastly, Melissa Hartline is a community planner at the Genesee County Land Bank Authority in Flint, Michigan. Since 2017, Ms. Hartline has co-led the Clean and Green program, engaging up to 70 community-based groups in cleaning, clearing, and maintaining vacant properties in the Flint area. Utilizing the Flint Property Portal and Regrid technologies, Ms. Hartline has designed a robust reporting and tracking system for the program. In addition, Ms. Hartline uses technology, mapping, and data analysis to improve property inspections, planning, and decision-making to support the cleanup and reuse of the 14,000 vacant properties in the Land Bank's inventory. Before turning it over to our speakers, I want to mention that we will allot time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your webinar browser and type your question into the Q&A box. We will share presentation slides and a video recording of today's presentation in the week following. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send us a message by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of your browser or by sending an email to me, Christina Carter Grant at ccarter@communityprogress.org. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Janelle.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you all for joining us today. I am going to just quickly kick us off with a bit of an overview of what we are going to talk about and what we mean when we say property condition data. And then I will pass it along to Austin to share about his work and experience in Memphis, and then to Melissa to share about her work and experience in Flint. So property condition surveys, what are we talking about? Typically, these are windshield or sidewalk surveys that record the exterior condition of properties, both structures and lots. They can be conducted by a variety of groups or individuals, and any combination of these, including city staff, hired consultants, neighborhood organizations and residents, universities, and other academic institutions. We'll hear today from a combination of those models, and there are other examples out there as well. Data collected in property condition surveys ranges based upon individual community goals, but at a minimum should include a standardized condition score, recording of whether structures exist or not on the parcel, and a photo. Additional data points can include things like vegetation observations, such as, are there trees? Is it being clearly maintained? What are the specific repair needs of the house? Roofs or porches, siding, windows, etc. What is great about these surveys is you can really specify it to the questions you are hoping to answer and the goals you're trying to achieve. Cities who have completed these surveys have used them for a variety of things, including point-in-time counts of vacancy, estimating demolition, rehab, and repair needs, and the potential cost, informing specific neighborhood strategies, and prioritizing limited resources. We're going to hear from 2 cities today, but quickly I want to hit on some key points of investing in these surveys and this type of data. These are all lessons learned from communities generally that have done these, along with Community Progress's kind of best practice recommendations for conducting property condition surveys. Always start with the data. If you're gearing up for a new strategy or program, make conducting a parcel survey step 1. There are some cities out there who will tell you they did it in the middle of the process or at the end, and that really limited the ability to use the data and limited the impact of their investment in a property condition survey. Plan to repeat it. The real value of the data in these surveys comes from year after year data. So plan upfront for future updates as much as possible. That might mean fundraising for 2 or 3 iterations, setting up the technology systems to do that, setting up ways for people to update it in the interim as well. Sharing the data, making it public. The power in, especially the 2 you'll hear today, and others who have done this, is putting this data into the hands of residents and all the groups that touch neighborhood revitalization and vacant property work in communities. And then lastly, making sure the new data collected can interact with and be used with other information in your community, such as linking to property tax delinquency, register of deeds for ownership data, code compliance, utility shutoffs, demolition lists, and that type of thing. So with that quick overview of some best practices and how this property condition surveys have been used, I will hand it over to Austin to share about Memphis's lessons learned.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you so much for taking time out of your days, your lunch hours, for some of you on the East Coast to nerd out about vacant land and property conditions. I'm going to see if I can make this transition smooth here. Past experience with Zoom says that is not likely, so bear with me here. Let's see. Get the start of this. Okay, I'm hoping everybody can see this slideshow here. If you can't, if someone on the panel or something just wants to chat me real quick, but hoping everybody can see this. So yeah, my goal today here is to build on Janelle's framing and talk a little bit about lessons from Memphis, Tennessee. And this is an interesting case study because, you know, Memphis is was in a similar position that I imagine many of your cities are currently in, right? If you're attending this webinar, maybe some of you have, you know, completed some variations of property surveys, maybe by neighborhood basis, and you're trying to build to thinking about how you can do this citywide. Memphis was in a very similar position, and we were building on, sorry, before I get to the background, we were building on a lot of the best practices we were seeing in places like Flint, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, Cleveland, Ohio, about, you know, 5-6 years ago. Memphis was in that same position. And so for us, we took those best practices and knowledges, and with varying levels of success, we're able to replicate. But I think in the process of replicating, we hopefully give other cities. So I'm going to kind of gear my talk today around some of the lessons we learned in replicating what we knew was this best practice that had been pioneered in other cities previously. And, you know, I just want to start by saying that I don't come bearing just good news, right? There are some tough lessons in here as well. There are some things, some mistakes that Janelle even mentioned in her framing that we made, some new mistakes we created along the way, as happens in this kind of work. But we're really excited to share some of this in hopes that maybe you don't, you know, step in the same exact kind of holes and traps that we stepped in walking down this path here in Memphis. But before that, I just want to talk a little bit about my background. You know, I'm this random guy from Memphis that's on your Zoom screen, and I might be on your Zoom screen if I start my video. Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm this random guy from Memphis on your Zoom screen. I'm a professor at Rhodes College, but before that, I, you know, was again probably in this very similar position. I've been a big supporter of Center for Community Progress content webinars for honestly probably almost 10 years now. And I've had the privilege of working on, you know, specifically a lot of these vacant land direct action kind of projects in cities like Youngstown, Ohio, interned there after undergrad before going to grad school. I also worked for community development corporations in Macon, Georgia, and a community land trust in Athens. And then I landed in Memphis about 6 years ago. And when I got to Memphis, I really started kind of digging more into the neighborhood data aspect of things. So I went from being the guy on the truck of brush and vegetation to sort of this idea as a data guy. And so I kind of traveled this path backwards, right? We're talking about how to build a property condition data system to support vacant land stewardship. I kind of started more on the vacant land stewardship side myself, on managing grass cutting programs and vacant lot stabilization programs for CDCs, and then sort of saw the value of data to that work on the back end. And then I realized as I got more into the data, sort of my impetus into where I'm at today was more thinking of how these systems, right? So Janelle stressed the property data systems in her introduction. Melissa's going to speak to one of the best in the country in my estimation with the Flint property portal. But these systems are really what we're discussing, right? And if the data isn't aware of the systems it's representing, I found this out the hard way, just being the guy in front of the map, pointing at dots and numbers that I didn't really fully understand, right? So beginning with the data in mind and having that strategy development built from that was something I kind of learned in my background. And I really come at this as less of an academic and more of still that guy sitting on the top of a truck full of brush in Youngstown, Ohio, right? That's still sort of the same goal. And for me, the discussion today around how to build data systems and specifically structure property surveys to promote land stewardship is kind of reflected in the reverse path of my specific background. So what's this guy from Memphis going to talk about today? So we're going to start with the end in mind, right? So one of the biggest things in Memphis that it was built from what we called Bluff City Snapshot, our citywide property survey in 2015, is this property data system. So I'm going to discuss about this a little bit. I know Melissa's going to dig into this a lot more, so I won't spend too much time doing this, but I want to sort of start this story by where it kind of ends, right? I'm going to give you a lot of spoilers in terms of one of the big projects and one of the big wins of the Memphis story is sort of the creation of the Memphis Property Hub, built on other best practices we were seeing in other cities. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Memphis, Tennessee, just to orient you a little to some of the key contexts that make the Memphis, a citywide survey of Memphis maybe a little more difficult than in other cities you're coming from. And then we'll talk about Bluff City Snapshot 1.0, sort of our 2015 survey and how we've been able to keep the momentum going, trying to replicate, trying to produce these best practices in the best way we can do. So I'll touch on a couple of different things that have happened since 2015. And then I'll leave you with some key questions to consider, maybe questions we can discuss more of, or Melissa or I can answer in the Q&A session. But just as you are at the same place of beginning to think about replication and beginning to think about vacant land stewardship through property condition data, I just have 3 or 4 questions to kind of start that conversation, maybe with local stakeholders in your own communities. Okay, so first, what's this property data system thing, right? This is a review for maybe many of you, especially those who have worked with local government and urban planning, or been in the neighborhood data game for a while, right? Essentially, this is just a hub of information, right? A warehouse. Hub can mean a lot of different things, but the key piece is it's built on what fancy data engineers will call this relational key, right? So for us and for many property data systems, that's a parcel ID, or the unique code or identifier, maybe it's called something different in your city, that uniquely identifies every property in your neighborhood. And so for us, the Bluff City Snapshot in our property survey was really the beginning of creating this larger property data system. And bringing this data together is half the battle, but the main piece of it, and Janelle touched on this too, in the intro, was getting community leaders to access this information in an actionable manner. Emphasis on actionable, right? I remember from my time when I was, out with grass cutting crews and working on neighborhood cleanups, that the last thing I wanted to do was spend a lot of time messing around with a GIS map, right? I didn't want to come in from, boarding up a vacant house and then come in to do some mapping work, right? I really wanted to spend a lot of my time, and everyone on the staff really wants to spend their time in the field doing the work. And so you want to be able to have the kind of data meet you where you're at and create systems where residents can do that, right? Not even to speak to maybe some of the technical or capacity limitations of community leaders, but more so just bandwidth wise, right? Just trying to continue to make this data available in an actionable manner. And Bluff City Snapshot and property surveys in Memphis were really the impetus on this journey that Memphis is still on. And we have certainly not perfected it, but we're continuing to try to meet the needs of our community development corporations, our community-based organizations. And property data systems do this really well. And for us, we borrow a data to action framework that the National Neighborhood Indicator Partnership uses, and we kind of adapted it for our Memphis needs. So our property data system needs to start from the raw data. So in surveys, this is the collected information, the systemic score you're giving a property, the specific information that you're getting from the field. Maybe this is assessor information, code enforcement data, land bank, informational properties in your community's land banks. Maybe it's evaluation information, but you're getting this raw data. And then on sort of on my screen, the left half of the circle, the raw data, enhanced data, store and share, that's really kind of the technical piece. But you see that only makes up just about half, not even really half of this entire system, right? So the majority of the time needs to be spent on thinking about how to build capacity, how to interpret data, and engage with it, and ultimately get to action. So this is kind of where we're going to go, right? This is the Bluff City Snapshot for us, built into this property data system. Okay, a little background on Memphis. Biggest thing to realize that separates Memphis from maybe a lot of other post-industrial cities, legacy cities, is it's super, super big. So here on the left-hand side, you can see a map of our city annexation. So from about the 1960s on, since 1970 in particular, our city size has gone from roughly 150 square miles to 324 square miles. And to put that into context, that's Orlando, Atlanta, and Seattle could all fit inside of Memphis. We know about the sprawl of Detroit, or I'm sure many on the call know about the sprawl of Detroit. About roughly 2 and a little bit more of Detroit could fit inside of Memphis. So almost 2.5 Detroits could fit in our city. So obviously this presents a big barrier, right? This makes driving and looking at every property in the city difficult. And our people have also, spread out. The maps on the right show 1970 to 2010. Sprawled a lot. So there's not a lot of population density. So even getting residents to survey their own neighborhoods can be hard, because like many other sprawled post-industrial cities, there are entire lots with nothing but vacant land, right? And so thinking about ways to incorporate vacant land metrics as well as structures, and just navigating the sheer size of our city presented some problems when we set out to do this in 2015, and certainly have tried to replicate it since. So what was the impetus for Memphis specifically? As is often the case, just stated bluntly, there was an election occurring in 2015. Famously, in 2012, Memphis settled. That headline is a little misleading. Wells Fargo pledged $432 million. Ultimately, I think the lawsuit was right around $10 million that they were required to send to Memphis, maybe 12. It's right in that range. But there was a large lawsuit, and the city of Memphis did win. They got Wells Fargo to settle for the subprime mortgage crisis and their predatory loans that they provided to Black and brown homeowners in Memphis. 1 in 4 single family homes in Memphis ultimately faced a foreclosure before it was all said and done. Our city has about 240,000 properties in it. So you can imagine the sheer number of that issue. So it was clearly a big topic in the 2015 election. You can see, pulled a headline from that time as that's going on. The man on your far left, AC Warden, he was the sitting city mayor, and then a police association captain and a former city councilman, Harold Collins, were 2 other incumbents, and then Jim Strickland was the 4th, also a city council member at the time. And Strickland in particular, who again, spoiler alert, ends up winning that race in 2015 and unseats the incumbent, was very interested and very focused on this sort of idea of being brilliant at the basics. So he named abandonment, bad properties as a key target area of his. But while this campaign is going on, plans for Bluff City Snapshot 1.0 are occurring. I'll go ahead and also spoil a little bit. The closest thing we got to a replication, we don't fully replicate this again. We haven't surveyed every property in our city since then, but the closest thing we get does tend to line up with the political cycle. So when it was time for Mayor Strickland to run for re-election, then the city was interested in tracking that change and abandonment of the projects and programs they had done in the last 4 years. And so we were able to use that impetus to get a little bit of money for a partial redo of the Bluff City Snapshot piece. But this is sort of the political context and impetus for starting the survey. And then obviously we were looking at Motor City Mapping, the Cleveland Property Survey, other surveys that had occurred by 2015, and really working with those groups to try to replicate that in Memphis. And so as a result, our process looks, a little bit similar to that, with maybe different on the scale size, just due to the size of the city. We had over 100 volunteers. We got to 98% of all residential properties, so we didn't get to 100. There were some townhomes and complexes that were gated that we couldn't get to, and there were also some multifamily properties that, apartments and units that we weren't able to get to. But all told, we looked at just over 237,000 properties. This was a coordinated effort between the City of Memphis Neighborhood Improvement, as well as Innovate Memphis. This is our city's innovation team. If anyone's familiar with Bloomberg Innovation programs, Memphis kind of started its innovation team as a 501c3, spun it off in 2012. So ultimately, Innovate Memphis was able to have a foot in city government, but a foot outside. This is going to be a key point, especially when we get to roles. But ultimately, the properties surveyed were through fall of 2015. So as the election was going on, the election occurred in October. And then we really start ramping up after Mayor Strickland wins and is the incoming mayor. We really ramp up in December and January. And I think we finished in early winter of 2016. So what was our process like? We had, the first one was done by a local group. I can go back, and this logo in the bottom right, you see a picture of one of our volunteers. Volunteers were paid, by the way, I don't mention this, but we did pay volunteers. If folks want to get into sort of the costs and budgets of both 1.0 and 2.0, we can discuss that as well. But they were paid volunteers. Memphis Parcel Survey, local developer, created an app for us. We've since, switched to Regrid in Loveland. But at the time, we used Memphis Parcel Survey, and we had both of these. All right. So we had our subjective 1 to 5 score. And then we had our specific kind of binary information, right? So the roof needs repaired, painting on siding, overgrown weeds, vacant unsecured, right? Specific things that surveyors could ask as they were looking at the properties. This discrepancy ultimately leads to the distrust in the results, which I'll discuss more. But in addition to looking at both the score, the subjective systematic score, and the binaries, the check boxes, surveyors also estimated occupancy as well. There were a variety, possible occupied, unoccupied, and we sort of created a spectrum of occupancy that now I can discuss this more too, but it sort of feeds into what we call our vacancy index. So we have 3 different sources of vacancy estimators: the windshield survey, electricity disconnections, and USPS. And we use those 3 sources to basically create kind of a confidence interval. So the survey was really important to complement some data we were already getting from other places. So what were our different roles? So the city and Innovate Memphis worked together to create the survey questions and the overall process. Finding the survey software, Memphis Parcel Survey did that in 1.0. Innovate Memphis trained the surveyors, coordinated the survey, quality assurance. So every time, 100 plus surveyors, they were systematically sent to different neighborhoods. We tried to give residents their own neighborhood to survey strategically, because we knew they would know that area better than anyone. And then so if they would go out to that neighborhood, come back that day, and say they got to 100, 200 properties, we would be spot checking ratings along the way. This was probably better done the second time around with 2.0 than 1.0. But there was some spot checking done by Innovate Memphis staff and CSER, that's the Center for Applied Earth Sciences and Engineering Research, the University of Memphis. I won't quiz you, I promise, but they were an important part. Research partners are really helpful here. And then CSER ultimately did a lot of this survey reporting and meaning making of the results. And we'll discuss that a little bit too. So getting into the results some. So these were our 2 big things on the left. You might not be able to make that out really well. It's kind of a big table, but it lists all the variables that we were looking at in the survey. So in addition to the rating and occupancy, presence of litter, land use, vegetation, trash, dumping, trees, construction, rent, vehicles, roof, windows, things like that. So it ended up being a really good data set. right? There were even some researchers that looked at the relationship between broken windows and childhood asthma, right? So researchers have really used this data, honestly, more so than city government. And a lot of these independent, yes, no binaries of things like, vehicle siding issues, graffiti, foundation problems have really allowed a lot of different research to come out of it. And then to the right, this is a training guide that we borrow from a consulting group, CZB LLC, from a survey that they did in Erie, Pennsylvania, I believe. So this is sort of the subjective piece. We're telling our surveyors to really go with your gut, right? This is almost like the qualitative aspect of it, right? From what signals is the property sending you, right? Are they staying on top of their details? Are they doing well? Or could they go either way? Are there several red flags? Are the red flags overwhelming? Like what is the property telling you? And the quicker the judgment, the better almost, right? The more you think about this, surveyors have a tendency to become kind of different property inspectors. And so it can be difficult. Speed up a little bit here for time's sake, but ultimately the results, I won't get too much into the weeds here, but this was a lot of the meaning making that was done by the University of Memphis. So they had sort of a cluster of the blight ratings. And then there's these two graphs on the top right ultimately were the seeds of kind of distrust in the results. There was this obsession, and I wasn't really in the room when this decision was made, but there was this obsession between comparing the individual ratings, the 1 to 5s, with the binaries, and assuming that the binary should predict the subjective ratings. I would argue that those are two different ratings. They're measuring two different things. The independent binaries are useful on their own for more detailed interventions, and the signals a property sending is useful on its own. But they were really wanting to try to compare these. And I can't even really entirely explain what table 2 is telling you, but I just know from reading the report that the conclusion here, this was some sort of machine learning tactic that ultimately said that it was about a 51-49% chance, about a 50-50 shot, whether the binaries actually did predict the rating. So the city ultimately hangs their hat on this as their key problem. So they're saying that this is the issue. And then they're hesitant to use the data because they feel like it's faulty information. And so, code enforcement, they use the data. They do end up, after, a year or two of discussion, they do end up agreeing to go back to any property that was a 4 or 5. That ended up being about 9,000 properties in the city. And this was the first time they sort of did proactive strategic code enforcement. But other than that, the results are dismissed. They're not used by our land bank. Blight Authority of Memphis has started in around this time, 2016. Our Community Redevelopment Authority, they have, the powers of eminent domain and have large TIF funds they can use for redevelopment, the removal of abandonment. They're also not really using these. These organizations are maybe doing their own surveys. So there was a missed opportunity here. While code enforcement was able to use it, we, to a certain extent, it wasn't fully integrated on the practice side. But it did get integrated a lot on the data side. So we created this data system, Memphis Property Hub. Again, Melissa's going to talk more about that. So I'll leave that to her. But I want to discuss a little bit in a couple minutes here the other ways it was used. So Bluff City Snapshot 2.0, again, right around re-election time. The city's interested in understanding some of this. They do not want to do the whole city. They just want to go back to these 4s and 5s in areas where there was a high amount of 4s and 5s. They also want to go away from the neighborhood volunteer model. I think that we can talk a lot about that. And I think there could be a lot of reasons for not doing that, for sticking with neighborhood residents. But ultimately, we use graduate research assistants managed by the University of Memphis's Research Center. And they ultimately just looked at about 14,737 properties. So it was a fraction of that 237,000. But it did allow us to see some over time trends for our most problem properties. So here are kind of the results of all the property survey in 2.0. And then here are some examples of those that stayed 4s and 5s between 2015 and 2020. And then ultimately, the biggest thing I think that has come out of this is other neighborhood surveys have said, okay, we got the 2015, we got the 2020, but we want to know kind of what's going on in between. And in this time, we also switched our survey over to Regrid. We've honestly looked at the Flint property portal a lot as a goal of ours. We've worked a lot with them to try to build up to where Flint is at on their systems. And so we think that using Regrid allows it to connect the survey more directly to our Memphis Property Hub system. So we moved the entire Property Hub over, and a lot of our community leaders access the Property Hub data through Regrid. And so here's some examples of ad hoc sort of neighborhood independent surveys. Orange Mound, the oldest Black neighborhood in Memphis, as currently has an ongoing survey. There was some former residents of the last public housing complex in Memphis that surveyed their neighborhood in a urban planning summer camp back in 2018 in South Memphis, in the Foot Homes area. So these neighborhood property surveys have allowed residents to sort of take control, and Innovate Memphis has played a role of giving free access to software, training, technical assistance, all that kind of stuff. And then the question was asked on the city side in 2019, could we automate this? Could there be a way to use kind of like Google Street technology? So Google's Data for Good group came in with Spring ML, and they took the 2015 images and ratings to train a machine learning model. And they had high resolution cameras on top of our public transit system that was taking 360 shots of the whole area. And so there's this question of whether this can be automated and maybe have ad hoc surveys sort of complement that. That's one strategy. I'm personally, I can save my opinions for another time, I guess, but I think there are some pros and cons of this option for sure to discuss, but it is a question that our city and folks locally are asking, and we'd be happy to hear some thoughts on that if this is something relevant to your community as well. Okay, so a few questions to start with. I won't really go through these. I'll just leave these up for us to consider, but what are you hoping to get out of it? What's the goal of the data system? What's their key partners? And what does that first step look like? And what's achievable in long term? I think just replicating what Janelle said, thinking about 2 or 3 times being on a 5 to 10 year time horizon, I think will prevent you from making some of the mistakes we made just going election cycle to election cycle. All right, and with that, I look forward to the discussion, and I'll now hand it over to Melissa Hartline to talk a little about Flint, Michigan.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you for everyone that's joined us today and for having me here today. I am going to start sharing my screen here. Okay. There we go. All right. Well, I am Melissa Hartline, a community planner from the Genesee County Land Bank. I wear many hats at the land bank, and a lot of it revolves around data analysis, GIS technology, and as well as our clean and green group, and managing the internal operations of those community groups, which I will cover in a little bit more detail. So just kind of a general overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to talk about our Flint Property Portal data tool, which thank you, Austin, for the introduction to that. And going into a little bit more specifics about the data and mapping and surveying tools that come with that. Some of our resident-driven data and the surveys associated with that. Our land bank inventory, our inspections, and then the data-driven decisions that are come subsequent to the data that comes out of the Flint Property Portal. Going to be looking at vacant property maintenance, and then our clean and green program, going into a little more detail with reporting and tracking mechanisms that we have built, and then covering just broad community-led vacant land stewardship processes that can be completed using the Flint Property Portal. So just kind of cover a little bit of background information about the portal itself. This is an application that was launched in 2017, and it was a partnership between the Genesee County Land Bank and the city of Flint. So half of the data is from us, half of the data is from the city, and we both manage our aspects of the portal. We really built the Flint Property Portal as a mechanism to increase public access of data and then increase transparency as well. And as such, this increases the trust between residents and local governments. And we have had our Flint Property Portal built by Regrid Technologies, or Loveland Technologies, excuse me, through the Regrid platform. And there was support through this Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, LISC, and the Community Foundation of Greater Flint to help develop the Flint Property Portal. So this is just kind of the homepage of the portal, what you would first look at if you opened it up. As you can see, we have the whole city of Flint outlined, and it's citywide data. We have parcel specific information tied to each and every property, almost 55,000 parcels within the city. And this is an interactive map, so you can zoom in, zoom out, go south, north, east, west, and move throughout the city to your specific areas. Some of the other things that the Flint Property Portal is able to do is look up property information. This is one of the most important tools that a lot of our residents are using on a very regular basis to look up the information of who owns this property, what's the demolition status of that property. So every single parcel within the city of Flint contains up to 40 pieces of property information and then a photograph as well. And users can look up these profiles either by typing in an address or just by clicking on a parcel on the map. So we make it very easy to access the data for each. The property portal also allows for property updates that can be done ongoing and throughout the entire season. As many communities face, property conditions can change overnight. And with these dynamic shifts and the need to base decisions on the information that we have, it's important to report property changes as they happen. For instance, if a property burns down. So through the property portal property update, residents can let us know and inform land bank and city staff of property changes, as well as report their community work. Flint Property Portal also has a really neat tool that I think this is my personal favorite, is the map making tool. And this allows for residents to be able to look up specific information in specific areas so they can build boundaries around just their block club, for instance. And they can look up, like in this map here, it says structure on property. Yes, we're looking for properties that are all in good condition and all in residential. So you can layer different data points and be able to produce a map with all of the properties highlighted that match that query that you created. And this can be small and large throughout the entire city, and you can see trends there, or you can hone it in on just your neighborhood and look at neighborhood specific trends. Another great thing that we were able to incorporate is a application that's available on mobile devices. We have it on both Apple and Android devices, and it really allows for the data to be at our fingertips while we're in the field at any point in time. And you can look up property information and submit property surveys through that application. This is just a view of what our application looks like from the mobile device. It gives you the map, it will show you the parcel specific, and what's really neat is it has a locator. So it will be able to see where you are in the map and be able to hone in directly on the parcel that you're standing on. So kind of touching on a few of our resident-driven data points that we have, as I was saying, we have the city data and we have the land bank data as the base for the Flint Property Portal. But then on top of that, we engage community-based groups every other year to collect property information through your neighborhood inventory. And that is a program managed through the city of Flint and the Community Foundation of Greater Flint that provides a stipend for neighborhood groups to collect property information within their areas. And this really serves as the base data for our ongoing portal updates, as it provides information on all parcels every 2 years. We have our property updates, which I touched on a little bit, where residents can go through and update information if it's incorrect or if there's been any changes. Our maintenance message that we can report vacant property maintenance on. And then our clean and green reporting. So if community groups affiliated with our land bank clean and green program can report their ongoing maintenance through that. And I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail further on along in this presentation. So first I want to touch on the Flint neighborhood inventory and property rating key. It's very similar to what Austin was describing with theirs. We have 5 different categories for properties where they're good condition, fair condition, poor condition, substandard, vacant lots, and then we have vacant lots with parking lots as well. So as residents are going through and completing your neighborhood inventory, they are looking for different specific indicators to tell them about if its property is in good condition, fair versus poor and substandard. So this is an example of a good condition property. You know, the roof's intact, foundation's intact, really overall, everything is structurally intact. Then we move into the fair condition properties where these may have some minor updates required. So, you know, you might have the roof is missing a few shingles. You may need to replace some of the siding or trim. Painting might be needed, but you're not going to see any major fire damage in these properties, just structurally sound at this point still. Then you move into the poor condition properties, and these are going to require more extensive repairs to bring them up to either fair or good condition. So you may have roof problems, foundation problems, some minor fire damage, but all in all, the property could still be salvaged if a significant enough investment was made. Then we finally reach our substandard properties, which these properties are beyond repair, and you may have completely fire damage properties. You have roofs collapsing, the foundations are collapsing. Demolition candidates would be in this category. And then collecting vacant lots and the number of vacant lots that are in your city, you know, properties that don't have any structures or any remnants left behind. They might have gardens, they might have benches, community projects on these sites. But being able to gather on every single parcel, if it's what the condition is, if there's a structure, and then being able to collect all of the different vacant lots across the city so you can see those trends. And so the property update survey layers on top of that neighborhood inventory data as property conditions change, and those are reviewed for accuracy by land bank and city staff. And residents can suggest a property for demolition using this, and then report issues as well as like illegally parked cars or tall grass or trash or debris on lots. Further, the maintenance message is another layer that residents can put on these properties where they may be going through and taking on a property next door to them, and they're cleaning up the trash, they're maintaining the grass. This allows for residents to let us know, hey, I'm taking care of this property. So altogether, the data that's accumulated in the Flint property portal creates these property overview charts. And you can see trends that these are all citywide trends where you can see the ratio of good condition to fair condition properties or buildings versus vacant lots. And these can even be honed in on neighborhoods further in the make maps. So trying to look more specifically at the land bank inventory and how we use the data in the Flint property portal. So we have almost 14,000 properties in the city of Flint alone, and majority of those are vacant lots, over 70%. And then we have 30% of those that still have structures. So we have different mechanisms of surveying each type of property. So on top of the resident submitted data, we also complete our own inspections on our inventories. So we have various different surveys that are completed using Regrid. These surveys are only editable by land bank staff. And this includes, you know, the initial inspection when a property comes through our hands through foreclosure. And if we are looking at trying to sell a property, the sales inspection to collect those key features. Demolition inspection, so what type of materials, the structural integrity, any dangers that surround those properties, following up with complaints that are submitted to us, and then following up with contractor compliance after demolitions have been completed, and even looking at the vegetation of clover after demolition sites have been seeded and growing. So we use this data in everyday decisions in every one of our departments at the land bank. And, you know, we use it for demolition, and we collect that data on condition, honing in on those substandard properties and poor condition properties. We account for the fire damage and community suggested demolitions. And we use all of that data along with GIS data to build our demolition prioritization score that was developed through community-driven surveying. We use it in our maintenance strategies, so collecting information about community maintenance, tracking patterns of illegal dumping, and reporting abandoned vehicles, and being able to follow up on those properties. Use it in our sales strategies, so collecting data on property condition and the home features. And then we also use it in our initial disposition strategy for properties. So trying to determine what the property path's going to be at the point of acquisition. Is it going to be a demo, a sale, or perhaps a community project? And just trying to think proactively about the path for each of our properties that come into our inventory through tax foreclosure. So what's a really cool feature now that we've had a few years of data built upon in the Flint property portal is you're able to track property condition changes and look at what the property looked like in 2017 versus what it looks like today. So all of these pictures are the same property. We start in 2017, there's still a structure on the site. And then somewhere between 2017 and 18, that structure burnt down and started to become a dumping site. And you can even see when the demolition was occurring and the debris and structure was being removed, to when we went back and confirmed that the contractors were following all their codes and compliances, and then to a vacant lot that's now growing clover and part of the community maintenance of clean and green. And so talking more about vacant property maintenance, we have almost 10,000 vacant properties, and we maintain the other vacant properties within the city. So there's 20,000 vacant properties within Flint, and to mow those once a month from spring to summer would cost over $7 million. And we have roughly $2 million for property maintenance. So from that gap really emerged the concept and the program of Clean and Green over 15 years ago. And this program was built to support innovative community groups in cleaning, greening, and beautifying otherwise vacant land in Genesee County. So we engage up to 70 community-based groups every year, and this includes churches, block clubs, neighborhood associations, and Clean and Green's even been recognized as a national model for engaging youth in activating vacant land, improving neighborhood conditions, and increasing public safety and health. Further, research shows that Clean and Green has helped to reduce gun violence and has reduced cases of child maltreatment within Clean and Green areas. And as the program has persisted, we've continued to innovate and rely more on technology to improve our program operations. And so since the development of the Flint property portal, we have started to report ongoing maintenance of clean and green groups through the Flint property portal. So each group has a designated service area that they mow and maintain. They maintain properties every 3 weeks, and then they report those specific parcels using the Clean and Green survey on the Flint property portal. So on the left side of the screen, that's actually what the app looks like. And you can see each one of the group's individual boundaries that they're working in, and then the different properties that they are maintaining in those areas as well are highlighted on the map. And then a few of these screenshots show just the survey itself, you know, what type of mow was completed, when did you complete the mow, and then if there was any grass or trash on the lot. And we ask that because even further, we ask additional questions about illegal dumping to try to capture information on trends that have been progressing throughout the city in relation to illegal dumping and trying to be proactive in addressing those. And tracking the clean and green maintenance, this has been a huge improvement in trying to track and see real time the maintenance that clean and green groups have been completing. Before we were using paper maps, it was hundreds and hundreds of maps by the end of the season. And now you see all of that data in one place. And program admin has access to the back end of the website. And all of the data is collected in a downloadable spreadsheet. So it's really user friendly, and group areas are tied to each one of those specific parcels. So you can pull up a list of this group is maintaining these lots on these dates. And the different color codes on this map just indicate different mowing rounds, as groups may maintain different properties each maintenance period. And then what's really nice is all of the data is backed up on our on our servers as well as regrid servers. So kind of just looking at some broad, community-led vacant land stewardship processes that can be taken by using the portal. Having that public access to property information and land bank properties, demolition status, and vacant properties has really allowed residents to be able to plan neighborhood cleanups on their own, plan community gardens, create neighborhood plans, map their conditions within their neighborhoods, and track trends, track demolition status of those nuisance properties that they've been wanting to get demolished over the years, creating maintenance plans specifically in relation to clean and green groups. We have our properties available for looking for purchase or leasing. You can look up land bank properties near you, and informing residents are able to inform land bank and city staff about properties that are concerns for them. So I think I am just out of time here. But definitely, if you have spare time, check out the Flint property portal. We'll be able to send out links at the end of the presentation if it hasn't already gone through the chat. But definitely take a few minutes, poke around, see all of the different capabilities that the portal has. Use the make maps, look up properties, and see condition changes over time. And with that, I thank you all for your time today and hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa and Austin. We've got a couple minutes left. So Austin, if you want to pop back on, I will lead us through. We have a boatload of questions that have come in. So I'm going to try and run through the shortest ones to answer first, so that we can get through as many as possible. And we can hang on an extra 5 minutes to get through them all if we need to. So for both Flint and Memphis, we had a couple of questions about what was the stipend that was paid to volunteers, who actually paid them, and where did the money to pay them come from?
Austin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Okay, it's still not. Okay, cool. Sorry, but it wasn't allowing me to turn my video back on. Sorry about that, y'all. Yeah. So for us, we paid. Like I said, I can maybe offline get a full budget, but I know we did it was per property charge for the volunteers. Money came from a combination of the city and I want to say a local foundation. Paying the volunteers was a very important thing for us because we think, as Melissa mentioned as well, we think residents' information around their neighborhoods is important. They are going to be the biggest expert on their own places and resident experts. And so we wanted to name that and acknowledge that. And I did see a question in the chat around sort of potential bias that produces. And from a survey, methodology standpoint, I think that's a valid point. But for this, this really wasn't a project we were doing for, empirical research. We were really wanting the residents to get involved and understand that, much like, Melissa mentioned in Flint, we wanted residents to feel like they had some agency and autonomy in solving these problems. And they learned, I think there was a sort of a peeling back of the curtain from the code enforcement side, that the residents kind of saw some of the challenges in addressing these issues, in the system that we have currently. So I think that sort of created some neighborhood advocates as well. But Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree what Austin was saying about the residents and being able to give voices to them through this mechanism. And on the city of Flint's side, that is managed through the city of Flint. The land bank doesn't manage the neighborhood inventory, but I do believe that it's a $500 stipend per community group that participates, and they are given specific neighborhood boundaries to inventory. And I believe that work is supported through City of Flint grants as well as the community foundation. Great.
There's another question if either of you can speak to if or how you engaged with local fire departments to kind of close that loop on when property conditions substantially change via fire, and if it happens faster through coordination, or are you relying on residents to update that data?
Melissa, do you want to take that first, or?
Let's have you go first on all the Q&A since you were the first presenter, and yeah.
Love it. Figuring it out on the fly. Yeah, love it. That's great. Yes, for us, it kind of happened, but if I told you it was intentional, I'd be lying. It happened in a kind of small town sort of way. The fire department built out their data analytics team around 2017, 2018. And one of the first hires they made was actually from a former analyst from Caesar, the University of Memphis resource that was kind of building the property work. So his involvement in the fire department allowed discussions to kind of happen around, the exact thing you're saying, right? Closing the loop on some of those fire damaged properties. And so I think for us, it was, because of that overlap allowed us to have those discussions and build that out. But I think it's something that there's been a lot of turnover in the local fire department here in the last couple of years, as I'm sure a lot of, governments are experiencing. And so those discussions haven't been able to keep going, but I think there was definitely, we have done some data sharing. The fire department has shared some fire damage information that's address and parcel ID. So that the closing of that loop has begun a little bit in Memphis.
Yeah, here in Flint, I think we're still getting our information from the fire department through spreadsheets. Not that I'm aware of our the fire department reporting on the Flint property portal. However, I have actually seen a lot of residents reporting it like immediately, like while the fire is still occurring. People will get on the portal and put it out there, and you still see the fire department on site putting out the fire. It's that immediate. So not necessarily more coordination with the fire department, at least not to my knowledge. But we've definitely seen a lot of property updates coming through residents as fires occur.
And then Melissa, I think this one's just for you. Someone asked about why Clover and why Clover inspections specifically when you were talking about vacant lots.
Okay, yeah, this is I'm glad we touched on this. So Clover is a slow growing ground cover. So on all of our demolitions, we, instead of planting grass that's going to, become waste high if it's not maintained on a regular basis, we seed and straw our properties with clover, and that's going to only reach like a maximum of 8 inches and doesn't need as regular mowing. And as well, it's a nitrogen fixer for the soil beneath. It removes contaminants. So there's a lot of different benefits that come with it, as well as supporting pollinators in the area too. But we go through and do those inspections because sometimes the seed's not of high quality. And if we find out, I know like years and years ago, this was before my time, one of the seeds ended up with barn grass in it. And you were ending up with, 6-inch tall grass. So we had gone to those sites, collected that information, went back to the contractor and was like, hey, the seed wasn't up to specs and qualifications, and we were able to get those lots reseeded. So that's why we go back and just double check that the clover is indeed growing and is healthy on the lot and doesn't require reseeding.
I'm going to give us one more, and then the ones we didn't get to, we'll follow up. We can send you answers. But the last one to round us out, folks are curious about how do you handle potential data manipulation from volunteers or that kind of quality control on the back end?
Yeah, so for us, both the Memphis Parcel Survey tool and the Loveland Technologies tool have timestamps and survey, surveyors, and it also tracks, obviously geocodes it to the parcel. So it's easy to, unique ID, see what, if there's a parcel ID more times, which we usually default to the one that was done last, unless the surveyor made a note about that. That was sort of some of the things when we did the quality control. In addition to spot check, we would check for duplicates. We would check for photos as well. So we would, the photos, if a photo was taken the first time and then maybe they got a better one the second time, right? We could see that. So a lot of the duplicate control was one of probably the big part that we do systematically across all surveyors. And as we're kind of spot checking and assuring the quality of the results.
Yeah, we follow a very similar process. As the surveys are coming in, we can review the pictures, review the data, see if there's any mismatch. Like I know one of the surveys that we complete, I look at, does the base data from the city say that this has a structure on it? And if I'm getting information that says the contradictory, then I'm going to look more at detail at that property and see, okay, were they at the right property? Maybe it was a partial shifted over, because that does happen. And if a partial shifted over, then that entire block is surveyed incorrectly. But we go back and we resurvey those properties when we find them. And there's a partnership between the city and the land bank in quality control for the different surveys that are completed.
Great, thank you all. Christina, you want to close us out, and the three of us will answer a couple of the lingering ones in written form.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much, Janelle, Austin, and Melissa. Really great presentations, and it was really interesting to learn more about your work. Seems like our audience was really engaged as well, so that's always great to see. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Be sure to visit our website, communityprogress.org, to learn more about upcoming webinars. I also encourage you to go to reclaimingvacantproperties.org and register for our Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference, which will be taking place in Chicago, September 7th through the 9th. Early bird is closing next week on the 4th, so please be sure to register for that as well. And with that, we will conclude for the afternoon. Have a great day, everyone.